have you on this webinar. I think my voice was muted, but good afternoon, everyone. Very excited to have you on this webinar with my dear friend Jarrell Smith. We're going to talk a lot about compliance monitoring and how do we modernize it for the 21st century. There's going to be some taboo topics that we'll take up. Hopefully, you can stay for the entire webinar and get something out of this conversation. Before we get started, just some quick housekeeping items. If you have any questions, feel free to send them over to our questions panel on GoToWebinar. We will take the questions towards the end of the webinar. Just a legal disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed by Jarrell and myself are our own and do not reflect our company policy or position. This webinar will be recorded, and we'll make it available if you need it, a copy of the slide deck as well. Your lines are currently muted, but if you have any issues, there is a number you can dial or reach out to us through the chat box. So let's kick this off. I'm my name is Mohammed Awais. I'm founder and CEO of Core Data. Over the last 3.5 years, our effort has been to create compliance solutions, including monitoring analytics, spend analytics, reporting, and of course automation within compliance. And we've served over 25 different pharma and device companies, and very excited to be partnering with my colleague and good friend Jarrell Smith. Jarrell is an associate director, compliance operations at Otsuka. He started back in 2013 as a project manager, sales operations initiatives. Prior to Otsuka, he worked at Everett Labs. He's completed his MSJ Health and Pharmaceutical and Intellectual Property from Seton Hall University School of Law right here in New Jersey. I'm very pleased to have Jarrell with me on this webinar, and I did want to inform the audience Jarrell did have a death in his family last night, and this morning when I reached out to him whether we should be postponing this webinar, he was a soldier. He was brave enough to say, okay, let's keep this going since we have almost 50 plus attendees that are going to be joining us today. So I'm very thankful to Jarrell, and of course, very sad for his loss as well. So Jarrell, if you want to say a few things about yourself.
Thanks, Mohammed, and happy to be with you guys. So, as Mohammed said in his intro, that I myself, I'm the associate director of compliance operations here at Otsuka Pharmaceutical. We kind of luckily bumped into Mohammed and his team at a conference. Over a year ago now, and we had some mutual colleagues that we knew of, and actually some needs that Mohammed and his team were able to meet and fulfill at this point. So I'm very happy to be able to share kind of my thought process and what my thought process has been in our interactions with Mohammed and team over at Core Data. So thanks, Mohammed.
Thank you, Jarrell. So just, we don't have an agenda for this webinar, but the flow we'll cover Jarrell's life when he did not have monitoring automation at Otsuka, the type of things he used to do to get data in a form that he could analyze risk and also present to his management. He's going to walk us through that process, why he was so curious, what made him do the digging that he wanted to do at Otsuka, and how he actually was doing it, because that's really relevant for the members of this audience, not only knowing why, but how someone can go about doing that. And then we're going to take a couple of polling questions, and then Jarrell is going to cover his life after monitoring automation. So once he's able to put this all together in a framework that gives him the ability to do this at any point in time, what does it feel like? What are some of the things he has discovered? So I'll let Jarrell walk us through, and if there's questions, please send us in the questions area. We'll be happy to take them either through the webinar or towards the end, and of course I'll keep chiming in and have questions for Jael as we go. So Jael, all yours.
Cool, thank you. So actually, let's go back to the meeting where I actually met Mohammed, his team, at that conference. It was at that particular conference that I identified this need. There was a discussion around a particular company that for those of us who are in this compliance space are probably very well aware of, and I won't throw darts at any other company, but it was a company that man, they got probably the fine of a lifetime, especially for a company the size that they were, really on the basis of the governing bodies that all of us are subject to, being the FDA, the DOJ, those governing bodies having information that they were able to find that company had access to, but in essence did nothing about. So in the seat that I sit in compliance, it really kind of triggered me to say, okay, what can I do? Because I know that my company, as well as many of our companies, have a ton of data that's floating around, and are we actually sure of what this data is saying and what we're actually doing with this data? So why do we do for Otsuka, and kind of my VP, I report directly to our VP. She gave me the latitude to go ahead and do it. Right, I brought the concern, I brought the thoughts to her based off of the conference, based off of the data, some of the data points that I knew that we had, and she gave me the latitude to do it. So what I'm calling it is compliance analytics in my space. You guys may call it something different, but in my space, I'm calling it compliance analytics, and that's different from sales analytics. And that's why Mohammed said that we may talk about some topics that are a little different. Sales analytics, for the most part, are not looking at things like ROI, right? It's a thing that they just cannot do. You're not looking at what we spend versus what we're writing versus what we're passing out in samples and how that's affecting, our portion of the market. So when it comes to those of us who are in this compliance space, we do need to look at those things. Right, and my next slide will give you the kind of visual of it, of who's there. But go back one. We're doing this to measure and identify potential compliance risk. Right, so we want to make sure that if there is compliance risk, that we are able to identify it before the governing bodies come in and identify it for us. Right, so we're trying to be proactive, not only just to keep us safe from the FDA, the DOJ, and so forth, but also, secondly, when we analyze it, that we're able to do something about it, right? So if we're able to identify it, we're able to do something about it. I put the two main statutes that a lot of the reporting that we'll talk about today and analytics that we're talking about today address, and that's the anti-kickback statutes and the False Claims Act. Mainly, as you'll see, surfaced around what are we spending, how are we spending, who are we spending it on, and in what manner, right? So we can go to the next one now. Why do we do these types of analytics? Because the government is, right? I talk too much about these governing bodies, so I put their symbols, we're especially those of us in compliance, are really familiar with, because if we get a letter with one of these symbols on it, it's a lot of work for us. So if the government is, and we are not, we put ourselves in a position of trying to be reactive and responsive as opposed to being prepared, right? So if they are, we need to be, and that would keep us clear of any implications, like I talked about first, that particular company that had those fines just because they didn't have the information or didn't do anything with the information that was available. This type of information assists us with investigations, right? I work very closely with our investigations team here at Otsuka. And some of the data that they have is necessary for me, and a lot of the data that I have is necessary for them. If there is a physician, a rep that's in question or investigation, a lot of the data that I'm pulling and mining here becomes pertinent information about that physician or about that rep or that rep's activities and those kind of things for us to complete investigations. And then it helps us to manage change. Like I said, if you have this information and we're not doing anything with it, what's the point of the information other than the governing bodies seeing it and asking you those questions as well? So as Mohammed said, I went to law school and finished law school. And a lot of us know, even beyond just me being in law school and learning this, a lot of times it's not simply the information that's there. It's a lot of times what can be perceived from the information. So there are times that we have this information and we're not paying attention to it because it's not all together. It's not all telling this story. And are we paying attention to the information that says, could it be perceived that there is an implication on the anti-kickback statute? If we have this information and we're doing something with it, we should be able to make that determination from our seat as opposed to the government coming in and telling us there's the potential that it's there. So whenever I'm at least doing this type of analytics, I'm looking at all of the data points in full story to answer the question, could it be perceived as some type of infraction? Okay?
And Jarrell, this is, I mean, just as on this slide itself, one thing that we see is even though the governing agencies still have limited data. I mean, they have more data than they used to because of the spend reporting and Medicare Part D and all of those data becoming publicly available. They even have access to prescription records from the Armed Services database, right? So they have access to data that essentially everyone in the public domain has, but still they have less data than what organizations internally do. And still, even with the tool sets that they have better visibility into more of what the organization does than a lot of the organizations internally. It seems like it should be the reverse. We should at least be as competent on our data as the government's going to be, so that we can look at it from an external lens, right? How would someone externally to the organization look at this data, and as you said, what would they perceive from it?
And now listen, prior to attending that particular conference that I went to, as someone who sat in the seat of compliance, I don't want to make it seem like for years or for the entire time that I sat in a compliance seat that I was so gung-ho about doing analytics. Right, I was a BA 10 years ago, so I wasn't excited about doing analytics from a compliance seat. But the fact of what you just said, that these governing agencies, they have access to it, and then, woe be unto you when the actual audit comes, right? When they come in and they're able to request documentation, they're able to request reporting, so on and so forth, and you're unfamiliar with it, and you don't know what the story says. So when we're talking about the story, that leads to this next slide. So I threw in this slide. I've used this slide before. That these are just a few pieces of data that I think every organization has, right? So we have information about speaker program compliance reports, sample reports, call metric reports, transparency, and there's probably a ton of others that we have. And this information is looked at by different groups, at least in our company prior to me doing this work. There were different groups, right? We have a transparency team that makes sure that when it comes time for transparency reporting in June, July, that you're not getting in contact with them because they're tucked away making sure that those reports are there. We have a sample operations team, over in sales ops that makes sure, we have a monitoring team that sits in compliance with me that handles speaker programs. So there's different groups that handle all of these reports, and they handle them in silos to the point that the picture looks like this, which is why I use this slide. What we're trying to do by addressing compliance analytics, as I'm calling it, and then moving in this direction to use the system and automate that process is this. It's still the same information. It's still the same data points that each individual team has access to do their job. And hopefully, as we continue to progress, it makes their job easier because it's there. It's already there, and it automates and it updates frequently. So that now, because we have the full picture with everything in one place, being able to be looked at together, we're able to answer that question that I previously posed. Can it be perceived that there are any infractions to any of the acts and statutes that we would be subject to? So that was the long-winded, a few slides worth of why, I chose to move this way to do it, is because I'm ultimately trying to get to this, the full picture of what our data says about our company and the compliance to the statutes and acts that govern our work, and then to be able to make decisions from there.
And Jarrell, I think you hit the nail, because we, in our work with our customers and in the industry, we see that larger pharmas have these siloed teams that operate and look at these risks as independent of each other. And in smaller pharmas, the compliance team is small, and even though they're responsible for all of these areas and more, they just don't have either the resources or the expertise or the support to actually be able to put this picture together. And that's where the struggle really is, because at the end of the day, the question really is, because when the government's coming in, they're asking, you had the data, why did you not know? And so the internal question often is, I have access to the data. Should I try something? Should I try to know what it is? Because sometimes not knowing can be better than knowing, because then if you know, then you have to take action as well. And that's where some of the teams struggle to figure out what should be done.
So right to your point of what should be done, I use this, I kind of gave this slide, and I can't take full credit for it. This is one that I actually took from Chordata when they pitched to me for the system. And I use it because I like the quotes that they have here. You can't manage what you don't measure. And then management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. Right? So I think that in the space of everyone doing their job in the silo, we're doing things right. Right? We're making sure that, in the area of transparency, that we're following the rules, that we're reporting, we're doing things right. But when it comes to being a leader, we do the right things, right? We make sure that we are aware of all things, painting that picture. And then the other reason that I went ahead and stole the slide from Chordata is down at the bottom. I know we have the arrows pointing to the right, but a lot of times, in my case anyway, those arrows could very well point right back to the left as well, right? Because I'm performing analytics on the data that we have, and from those analytics, I'm able to make strategic decisions, strategic suggestions to multiple cross-functional teams, be it within compliance, be it to the investigations team, be it even back over to our sales organizations. And then they, along with us in compliance, are able to operationalize, right? To take those strategic decisions of what we, performed analytics on, and to take action on it, to do something about anything that we see. So that's the reason that I wanted to at least share my thoughts on this particular slide, to be able to move from analytics to strategic decisions and then ultimately into operation.
Right. And Jirel, just I know prior to having this automated and having the system do a lot of the work for you, you had to take the boulder up the mountain. And talk to us about what that entailed and how much work you had to put in just to get some of these things together for your making sense yourself, and not only that, but feeling comfortable enough to present it to your management and leadership.
So to that point, the first step that I took when I realized, following that conference, that we needed to do something, that we needed some way to take all of this information and put it together to analyze our compliance risk. To the left, it was an uphill battle against time, right? So it's already a struggle to climb uphill for something that was never created, that we did not have, in our compliance department. But then it's the race against time and how much time certain things took me. Because again, I took on this role or this responsibility almost voluntarily, but also voluntold kind of thing. In addition to the rest of the responsibilities that I had in my role. So to the right, here's what that uphill climb against time really looked like. I was dealing with multiple sources of data, just obtaining those sources of data from our sales automation tool, from, in our case, IQVIA for sales data, sample data, spend data. Just a matter of gathering the data was a week.
So I'm going to stop you there, because you almost nonchalantly mentioned something that I know a lot of the audience members are really scared to touch, which is the scripts data. And that's one of the topics I wanted to definitely talk to you about. Because when we're working with some of our customers and in the conferences, one of the things we noticed is that there's still some reservation in terms of compliance being able to use scripts data. And I know it's a big no-no when it comes to analyzing scripts versus spend as far as sales and commercial teams and brand and sales ops are concerned. But for compliance, it's a matter of life and death, because this is what triggers conversations from the outside agencies that we talked about, because they have access to scripts, prescriptions, spend, and now they can make that correlation at any point in time. So tell me what took you, or how did you make the case to get access to the TRX data in particular? Because knowing the audience and our customers, I know that's one of the most challenging parts of compliance, to get that.
So candidly, it was still a fight.
Okay.
Right. My particular VP, she was for it. Once I made the case for her that, hey, listen, government agencies have it, we have it, and the reality of this particular case, which she was familiar with, and then I kind of took the longitude to go and look up some other cases, if it had happened, and it did. In those cases where there was correlation, right? If there's correlation, let's back up. In those cases that I looked at, they were looking for correlation between items of value, I'll just say items of value, being given to physicians and scripts, right? The idea of, is a company, because back in the day, right? So let's just have, clear conversation.
Yeah.
Now, back in the day, pharma companies were able to give out, the little tchotchkes, the pens, the pads, the this, the that. My grandmother worked for a pharmaceutical company way back when, and I think I still have notepads and pens floating around my house, and she's been retired for 15 years now, probably 20 years. But I still have pens, pads, and little tchotchkes and balls and all kinds of things with the company's name on it, because folks would come in and just drop off, all of those types of things. And it's not just from her company; it's from a bunch of them that they would just come in and drop off, items. We can't do that anymore, right? So because we can't do that anymore, the idea out there is that there's still ways to pay for scripts, right? So we want to at least pay attention to that. That's the whole point of an anti-kickback statute, is someone getting some type of kickback for writing your script? And without actually paying attention to any type of correlation, how do you know, right? There would be no anti-kickback statute if the governing bodies were not paying attention to that. So if they're paying attention to it, again, as I said kind of at the top, we need to be prepared to look at that. In my opinion anyway, and again, this is my opinion. It's not necessarily Muhammad's company or my company. It's just my opinion since I sit in the seat and do this work. It's such a faux pas because we've been conditioned that way because of sales. A lot of our companies are so sales driven, and ours is too, right? The reason that we're here to do business is to make money for our companies. So we are sales driven, and guess what? If the company makes money, in most of our cases in pharma, I make money, right? The company does well, I get a bonus at the end of the year. Everybody's happy. The company, myself, everybody's happy. But at the same time, it goes back to, being that leader and doing not just right, but doing the right things. So we're able to pay attention to make sure that we're doing the right things, and that we don't have certain areas of the country or certain districts and certain doctors that it could be perceived that we're not always doing the right thing. So that's why. Was there?
No, okay. But just on that point, Joel, I think that you kind of hit a point that I want to reiterate. So for the purpose of anti-kickback statute, the question we're asking within compliance is, are any of our activities that result in some sort of transfer of value or benefit to a physician, are they resulting in changes to prescribing behavior, right? And that's a question one. And maybe perhaps the reverse question is, if prescription behavior is changing, are we using that to incentivize more or provide more value to that physician, right? So in either case, the underlying question requires us to look at the script writing behavior, because we cannot answer it without having access to that data. And that's why I just wanted to kind of pause there and
let me add a caveat just to that, Muhammad. So let me say that the script data itself and the direct correlation of script data and items of value kind of things, that's not the end of the story, right? It's a very good place to start, right? Because I've had some that have correlation where they've gone up, but there's good reason for it, right? So it's a starting point. We have good reasons, things like, oh, well, we didn't release our last product until the middle of last year. Okay, we started giving him money last year as well, or items of value. He became a speaker, we picked up our sampling. Well, the reason that our sampling picked up is because we released a new product, so he's getting more product. The timing. So I just wanted to add that caveat that looking at that correlation isn't the end of the story. It's much more of a good starting point for us to then investigate, right? So it's a matter of pulling out, and in some of the slides I have examples of the manual work that I did, and then where we are now with the automation, or at least with the system, of pulling out where the outliers are, and then being able to look even more in detail at those outliers. So it's a starting point, it's not the end of the story.
Wonderful. And Gerald, we'll take a quick poll here from the audience just to see if folks have access to script data for their monitoring purposes. So I'll launch a quick poll. It should appear in your polls window. Let me just launch it. It should appear on your system, and you should be able to respond with a yes or a no. And we'll take a quick poll poll from everyone in the audience, see what people say about. I'll leave it for another 10, 15 seconds. If you can quickly vote, we'd love to capture your input, because this will give us an indication of how, at least in our audience today, how people feel about having access to Scripps data. This question is just about whether you do have access for monitoring purposes or not. We have almost half the audience has already responded. So I'll share the results here really quickly, and then we'll keep moving forward. So I know we're halfway through. So the polling results are even. Actually, 50% of the audience said they have access, and 50% said they don't have access. So it's a good good split, which means it's far better than at least I had envisioned in speaking at conferences and otherwise, where whenever we're talking about Scripps data, there seems to be some resistance. So back to your, taking the manual route, Jarrell. It seems like you were spending almost 3 weeks every time you had to do this analysis. What was the results, and can you share some of the, what you got out of it when you were doing it manually?
So just to finish this one, kind of the step was the information gathering. That was a week, creating a sortable Excel spreadsheet, right? So I had to take that information and get some help, right, from our BA team here, and getting them that information and having them to put it in some type of sortable Excel sheet with macros and all types of fun to help me, get through it, was about another week. And then I had to perform an analysis of it, right? I had to do sorting on each and every column to see who filters to the top, where the breaking points were on each of those topics. That would take me a day or two to get through. And then once I completed that analytics, I wasn't going to put a spreadsheet in front of my senior management, right, our senior leadership teams. Again, I report to the VP here, and her counterparts as well. So I'm not going to put a spreadsheet in front of them. So I wound up creating some type of presentation to put in front of them that made the data and the information that I was gathering much easier to digest. So here's just a screenshot of this is majority of the spreadsheet. So up at the top, I did sanitize the HCP names that popped up here. But we had our segmentation there. We had the kind of operational pieces of what the field was doing. We had deviations, were there changes from this point last year to where we are now. So this was all manual in an Excel spreadsheet that I had our BA team do for us. And it was all of these columns you can actually see. I was probably filtering through this when I took the screenshots. Filtering at, okay, where's my breaking point for calls? Where's my breaking point for samples? Who filters up to the top? For me to then be able to look at if there's any correlation, if there's anything that's shocking. Have we given anybody anything of value far more than anyone else? And then let's see if that influence and impact anything else that we may want to take a look at. So creating this was kind of that first step where we did the sortable Excel spreadsheet. That then led to, this was the beginning of my presentation to our senior leadership, where, okay, we want to see how much we've paid folks, right? In speaker programs, that's probably the easiest and most direct form of an item of value is the cash that we would give them. And then kind of trickles down to the meals, because that would be next most expensive. Well, some companies, depending on the product and the samples may be next in value. But for us anyway, it's, kind of speaker programs down into the meals that we pay for them, down to the samples, to analyze items of value. So this was then next where I would show our senior leadership how I was able to identify outliers. So I would basically take the spreadsheet that was created for me and put it into scattered plots. I'd filter on one of the columns, and I put it in the scattered plot and see where folks were outliers. So this is just kind of an example of one of the months that I did where, these are our outliers here. So then that would lead into something like this, right, where there will be the outliers that I was able to identify based on the analytics, based on the scattered plots, and then give me the full picture of them. What did we spend on it? Well, what's their segmentation? Are we supposed to be calling them a lot? Let's start there, right? And if we are, how many calls are being made? How many samples are being dropped? Which is going to tell me, it's going to start that conversation of items of value. How much time? Because time is an item of value, right? Especially if we're paying sales reps to be out in the field to see them, time is also an item of value. So I'm concerned with how many calls and if that call ratio matches the segmentation value for that particular doctor. Then we go into the financials of how much we spent, how much money we're giving, how much in fees, how much in SEP, SEP being just the kind of breakfast or donuts and that kind of thing that a sales rep might drop when they go. And then any other observations, right? So what did they do last year as far as our spend, and what were they last year as far as segmentation? Are they the same segmentation, which would help kind of going back to that point of any correlation isn't the end of the story. I need to know some of this other information to see if there's a reason, if there is any correlation. So this is what I was doing quite manually. As you can see, and like Muhammad kind of did the math for me, almost 3 weeks to do it. And we know what 3 weeks to do this means. It means that as soon as I finish doing that work and I breathe for 3 days or so, I'm right back to doing it for the following month.
Wow. So you're spending all of your time doing this. But one thing even though it was a lot of work, what I do want to call out, Jarrell, is just your previous slide. Even for a resource-intensive effort that it was upfront, if you look at what your report was able to identify, was really a few physicians out of the universe that you have that you really have to focus for that next slide that you created, right? So I think that upfront work, while it's a lot, and sometimes I'm sure you were not even sure of the quality because all of this was happening manually of numbers. But if you're doing that and still having to focus on just a few of those thousands of physicians, I think that's great. I mean, that investment of time upfront, because what we see a lot of times is without having this visibility, someone's looking at physicians here which have there's no risk associated with it. And so why invest time, energy, and monitoring effort on physicians that are not risky for your company from this perspective?
If anybody's wondering, yes, we did look at that guy who's way out there at like 350 over to the right. Yes, we did. This is just grabbing the initial one.
Yeah, so I think from that perspective, I feel it's an effective use of your resources. So I'll take a quick poll just to get familiar with how people are where they are in their journey, and the question really is just a quick poll from the audience whether you're using some sort of an automate mechanisms to do your monitoring for compliance or analytics. I'll take a quick, maybe 30 seconds, I'll give you guys 30 seconds to talk through this, and then we'll go back to Jarrell and he'll talk a little bit about when, that 3-week effort every month, how did he manage to automate it so that now he has the data on his fingertip, he's able to do the same level of analytics and more without having to go through the 3 weeks effort, and what has that resulted in for him. So I think we have almost half the folks that have responded, so I'll publish the poll results, and it's really almost 57% as no and 43% as yes. As you can see, it will show up on the screen really quickly. So it at least means that almost half of our audience does not have any automation to really monitor for compliance risks. All right, so going back to Jarrell's presentation. So Jarrell, talk to me about what happened once you started building, or, I guess it's very easy to understand why you would want to have this automated, because you were pretty much spending all your time doing this. So what did you do, and what are some of the results you can share with us?
So I will say that I think the time that I spent was beneficial, right? It was beneficial getting very, very familiar with the data. It was beneficial to help come up with some of the KRIs that we would then establish in automation. Coming up with business rules, KRI, setting up the KRIs, that all came from the work that I put in up front in doing it manually. So I don't think there's anybody more proficient in what the needs are and what the KRIs would be than me with the time that I spent. So with automation, or even moving in that direction of signing in with the system, or signing up to get the system here, they were all true. These are all things that I thought through in presenting my idea to have a system that helps us to automate, and they all are starting to ring true. It's automation, so that the time of gathering feeds is way down, right? We were able to schedule from our data warehouse when feeds would be sent to, at this point, Core Data for gathering. We were able to then give them our thought process for business rules that they were able to build logic into without me having to, kind of click and filter on up to 10, 15 separate columns. That logic is built in to tell me who's at the top of each of these data points. So that's where automation helped me, and that's a week's worth of time that got cut down. That now that the feeds are going automatically, and once it hits the system, the data is gathered and put in one place, and the logic is applied to it, that week basically drills down to a day, in a sense. I have all my data in one place, right? So as opposed to having to go to sales operations, having to go to my transparency reporting team, so on and so forth, and get that information, because that data mining is automated now, I go to one single source. Not that I don't want to talk to my counterparts over in transparency or sales ops, but it's all in one place now that I can go in and see the information that I need and just pull it. One big thing that I was hopeful for, right, is because we have all these data points, that the information is going to be useful to different groups within compliance, right? So we have transparency, we have legal monitoring for speaker programs. We have myself that's in compliance operations. So there's a few different groups that are going to benefit from this information, and all it really took for me to give them this information was a login and password, right? So I asked for a certain amount of logins, which we were able to work out. That me giving them access to this information and this data was a matter of a login name and a password. So now it's available across groups, and it's not that time-consuming piece, because all of us are busy, especially in compliance these days, for someone to email me and say, hey, Jarrell, can you send me this information? And who knows, I'm traveling, I'm doing something else. Now they can go into their own system, push a button, and they have the information that they would have been requesting from me previously when I was doing this manually. And then it's updated regularly, right? There's a lot of this data that we are getting on a weekly basis. There's other data points that we're getting on a monthly basis, and we were able to set that. Whereas previously, there was no way in the world that I was taking any portion of this data on a weekly basis. So it just wasn't going to be possible. Showing you kind of the timelines of what it took for me to get through it, it just wasn't going to be possible for me to do it on a weekly basis. So some of this data that I may want to see on a weekly basis, now it's possible because it's going into the system, the feed is automated, the logic is already there, and it's updated within the system. So being able to have at least closer to real-time information seems to be extremely beneficial.
So Jarrell, I think, thank you for sharing that. So one thing I basically heard is not only did it minimize your time, which I think is a saving in itself, but the access that you could give to others and having it in a single place, updated regularly, helps you not only save time by showing it to others, but in terms of looking at risks from a variety of perspectives, and other team members can actually start to do self-service. So I know you have put some slides in terms of showing what your eventual outputs look like. And I think these look wonderful. Is there something you'd like to share as you implemented? Was there something that you found that might have been of, was a surprise, or something that, once the system went through that you can share as well?
So this one, I put a few slides. I think I put maybe 3 or 4 slides in here. So this one was pretty standard for me. This one is just showing you kind of the correlation between the spreadsheets that I previously showed that were talking about calls and samples and so on and so forth. This is what that turned into. Okay. So this one was somewhat easy. I just wanted to show this one for the correlation. Frequent attendees, this one was something different. This one actually did show to be beneficial across groups. So it wasn't just beneficial for me, and this goes back to a slide. You can see that my portion is wrapping up because I'm coming full circle now. It lends itself to the earlier slide where I talked about analytics, strategic, and then operational. So we were able to identify some folks that had gone to too many programs for speaker programs, that means, and that lends itself to compliance. So that's my group. That's me reporting up to my VP. Hey, listen, I'm seeing some of these speakers. But it also became beneficial for our legal monitoring team, who's responsible for monitoring the activities of our speaker programs and our interactions with HCPs, for them to take a look at this as well. Hey, let's look at this person. Are they someone who should be coming to our programs? Number one. Number two, are they a speaker for us? Right? Are they purely academic, or are they writers? So that's some of the monitoring pieces that was able to help with that group. And then we were able to use this information, or we are able to use this information to go over into the sales side and the sales operations side to say, hey, is this person, how many times do you have this person being allowed to be seen, or to be invited to a program? And then that in turn goes out to the sales force, right? So this is some of the reporting, this one, and I think there's one other out there that we use when we're monitoring speakers that becomes a cross-functional usage, not just for me doing it, but it becomes that analytics from my seat to strategic planning and then to operationalize. We're able to kind of stop compliance risk before we get there. And I think that's extremely important, that if we have a number that we feel keeps us away from risk and we start to approach it because we have something, because we're actively looking at the data, we're able to see when we're approaching those numbers and then operationalize it so that we do step away from that risk as opposed to just letting it go.
I think the key there for me is just being proactive, right? So instead of waiting till the end of the year or, till, whatever time period or when you get a knock on the door, but throughout the year, being in the practice of looking at the data, looking at where some of the key risks are, and being able to proactively monitor and take actions as necessary.
Yeah.
And I know this was one of the ones that you wanted to share as well.
Yeah, this is the meals. This is looking at speaker meals. So again, this is one of those. All right, we've set a number of what's going to keep us clear of compliance risk when it comes to paying for meals for doctors, right? So this allows us, again, as you see all the 4 quadrants. We have multiple products that we do sales, the speaker programs on, so we're able to see by meal type, right? Do we have violations or not? So thankfully, we have few violations. But then down at the bottom, we're able to see for what products the violations come, and then we're able to see who the reps are. Again, I sanitize the data so that we don't have anybody's name floating out there. But it gives us a way to see who the reps are so that then we can operationalize. We can contact their DM, who can then reach out to them and say, hey, you got a bunch of meals that are beyond what our limits are. So we're able to operationalize. We're able to get information back from that rep. Okay, what happened? Oh, maybe it was allocated a certain way because we had people not show up. And if we can get that information, we're good. But it gives us a starting point to be able to look at where the risk is and then to do something about it. So that's, again, another one of those cross-functional reports.
I think this one is really important because I know a lot of our customers take a look at meals independently through Concur or their T&E system. But having a visibility across all the meals to see which reps are actually going over the line more time than others is a good one to have, because now you're not looking at individual expense reports, but you're identifying your risks to a specific individual. And I think that helps for your monitoring effectiveness as well. So audience members, we're coming towards the end of the webinar final stretch. If there's questions, feel free to put them into the questions box. What I'll share is just a couple of some easy ways to incorporate monitoring analytics if you don't have a systems-based approach right now, and perhaps in the next 2-3 minutes I'll share that, and then we'll take any questions that come through from the audience as well. So something as small as or as critical as a speaker program annual cap, just showing some way to visually put it together where you can have a visual that gives you your speaker program spend and specifically around individual speakers throughout the year. And it can be updated automatically based on where your speaker program or speaker bureau files come through. Some of you are going to have this done by the speaker bureau, but it still makes sense to do this around or after you get the file from speaker bureau, because you don't know what you might have done with the speaker in terms of other activities. The thing to note here is that not only is it important to know which speakers have exceeded the cap, but it's also important to note as you're going through the year which ones are nearing the cap, so you're able to then, as Jarrell mentioned, operationalize this indicator and really take action to make sure that you're not engaging that speaker again before the year ends. Similarly, you could start to do analytics where you could start to look at the cost per event. So this then takes us away from just pure compliance into business value, right? So you could have additional conversations with your commercial teams in terms of when an event exceeds your benchmark, right? So if you're looking at an average event which costs $500 per attendee, to now some of these outlier events where the per attendee cost has gone above $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000, you would want to know not only from a compliance perspective why the additional spend, but also from a business perspective whether that's effective and efficient. And you can, as Jarrell had shown us, you can start to combine a variety of these violations of your policies or of what you're looking for, whether it's meal limits, whether it's number of times an attendee can attend a speaker program for a product, and other types of risk indicators. And you can combine all of that to get visibility by rep, by your product brand, and by regions as well. And lastly, what I'll cover is this whole area of scripts versus transfers of value that I feel that is still a relatively taboo topic from at least my experience. But in the end, you have to be comfortable either with not knowing what's in your data, right? So if you are comfortable with that statement where you're comfortable not knowing what's in your data, then it's something that you don't have to go down this path. But if you're uncomfortable, if there is things that at least from an outside perspective, there's going to be complete visibility on it, and you don't know what it looks like, then a lot of times it's better to at least have a sense. One of the conferences I was at, a panelist of chief compliance officers was asked what keeps them up at night, and the consistent answer across those panelists was, we don't know what's in our data, and that's what keeps them up at night. So at least the knowledge of it is important, and how you use it is going to be something that is dependent on you. But I wanted to share here where, just to try to get to the root of, is there a risk in our organization when we do all of these commercial activities? And of course, that's reflected by the script count that you might have. And a very, very simple way to really look at this is you could plot your spend against prescriptions, and you could start to identify physicians that are lower risk. So on the left vertical, they're lower risk because they're heavy writers, but you're not doing much with them in terms of transfers of values. And the bottom lower risk because you're spending much on them, but they don't write many prescriptions for you. However, you could look at, so the box that you see here is similar to what Jarrell had shown us in his diagrams, where you could see the outliers, is where you could focus your activities. So instead of looking at thousands of physicians, you're now looking at a select few to be able to effectively monitor and be able to put together documentation around your activities with them. So that's the extent of the webinar. I just wanted to share the story that Jarrell had and how he had come through and made some changes. Jarrell, if you could share maybe perhaps one thing that you found after you implemented automation, and then perhaps we'll close out this webinar because we're coming up on the hour.
So the one big thing that I found is that there's a ton of information and a wealth of knowledge that I'm able to gain about not only our sales forces, but our interactions with HCPs. And even more than just knowing that information and having the familiarity with the information is the comfort, right? Is the comfort to know that if I'm audited or if the company, has this information floating out there, out and around, that my team specifically who deals with this directly, as well as our compliance department, because I made it available, to the folks in the compliance department, are also prepared, right? So it's this feeling of comfort that lets me know that what anyone else knows about our company and about our compliance risk, so do I. So it's the information itself and how much information is out there, and if there's any potential correlations that tell that story of could it be perceived as in that full picture, that I'm aware of it before anyone else is. So I think those are the biggest things for me.
So thank you for sharing, Jarrell, your story and your journey. We're coming right on time, so I'd like to close out this webinar. If there's questions, feel free to email us. We're happy to send them over to Jarrell as well and get you responses. If you'd like to add Jarrell to your LinkedIn, feel free to do so. He's always helpful and definitely someone worth knowing in the compliance space. Thank you, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar or at conferences shortly. Appreciate the time that you spent with us today, and Jarrell, thank you so much. I know you had a loss in the family, and you're still able to conduct this webinar. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. No problem. Thank you.
Take care, guys. Bye.